Good morning and welcome to our opening session, The COVID Disruption and the New Normal in Facilities Management. Before we begin, it's our pleasure to recognize one of our diamond sponsors this morning, Day Automation. Day has been a partner and a friend of our School Facilities Association for many years. We truly value and appreciate their support and welcome Day to say a few welcoming remarks.
My name is Jeff Day, and on behalf of all of us at Day Automation, we'd like to sincerely thank you for all you've done to bring back school. You've been handed the monumental task of educating our community's children during these unprecedented times. We're proud of what you've done to reopen school, and we're thankful that we could be your partner through this process. No matter what school looks like, whether it's online remote learning, in-person classes, or a combination of the two, just know that we'll be there to help you when you need us. Our goal is to create safe, healthy, connected, and energy-efficient learning environments for all your students. We sincerely appreciate all your efforts, and we wanted to take this moment to just say thank you.
Thank you from all of us in Buffalo.
Thank you from Rochester. Everything you've done. From all of us in Syracuse, thank you. North Country, thank you.
Thank you from everyone in Albany.
Thank you from the Hudson Valley. First of all, from the Southern Tier, we sincerely thank you. Second of all, I need your help. I cannot find technical in this virtual world. Rock on.
Now to introduce our speakers. Dr. Ericka Mochan earned a BS in Biomedical Engineering from Western New England University in 2011 and a Ph.D. in Computational Biology from the University of Pittsburgh in 2016. Ericka is an assistant professor of mathematics at Carlow University, where she also serves as the program director for Carlow's newly formed Data Analytics program. Ericka's courses include many real-world examples of the applications of mathematics to a variety of fields, including public health, sports, criminal justice, biology, and chemistry. Ericka's proud dad, Jeff Mochan, is Director of Facilities at Clyde-Savannah Central School District and was previously the Director of Facilities for Waterloo Central School District. He serves as second vice president for the New York State School Facilities Association. And without further ado, take it away.
Thank you, Melissa. What a nice introduction. Makes me sound a lot smarter than maybe I am. So, as she said, I am an assistant professor in mathematics and data analytics, but before you panic, I promise there's going to be absolutely no math whatsoever in these slides. There's not going to be any like 9th grade trig tests or anything. Instead, we're going to focus on what my research has actually focused on for the last decade, which is in the area of computational and mathematical biology, which basically means I take math and computer science and apply it to medical problems so that we can do experiments on a computer rather than on a real person. So for the last 9 or 10 years, I've worked with influenza and bacterial pneumonia, but you can imagine that everybody who did anything involving lungs or virus or anything like that kind of switched gears in March and started working on COVID-19 research. So I am one of those people, and I will be talking to you a little bit today about kind of the science behind the spread of COVID-19 and the science behind some of the mitigation measures that I'm sure you've all been taking within your own districts. And the efficacy of those. And then my father is going to take over and talk a little bit about how he took a lot of this information and then applied it in his own district. So let's start with, get my slide to change. There we go. Okay, so we'll start with an overview of how serious a COVID infection really is. I think probably in all of the different media that you've taken in the last 6 or 8 months, you've heard probably some people talking about the fact that it's basically just a cold, and some people talking about COVID being an absolute death sentence. And the reality is somewhere in between. So the vast majority of cases that have been very serious in COVID-19 have been in people who are ages 60 and over, which truthfully is true for almost all diseases. So on this graph on the left here, you can see death rates. These are data taken from Italy and the UK, but the US follows approximately the same pattern, where the majority of deaths have been in people, again, ages 60 and up. The good news there is that the vast majority of infections of COVID-19 around the globe have actually been mild. So somewhere around 81% of them have been people who really just felt like they had the flu. Only about 14% have been severe enough to require hospitalization, and less than 5% have been critical enough to require an ICU stay. So that's not to say that it's not serious. We all know we've had over 200,000 deaths already. But for most people, statistically, if you do end up acquiring COVID, the odds are in your favor. In addition to it being most risky for people ages 60 and over, it's also fairly risky for people who already have some pre-existing condition that is going to affect either your heart or your lungs or your immune system in some way. So not surprisingly, people with, say, cardiovascular disease or some COPD or other chronic respiratory disease are going to be some of the people who are most likely to end up needing, say, a ventilator as a result of acquiring COVID on top of that. Less than 1% of the deaths due to COVID have actually occurred in somebody with no pre-existing condition whatsoever. So if you're under 60 and leading a relatively healthy lifestyle, you do not need to panic, despite the fact that this is a global pandemic. Okay. Next, let's talk a little bit about what's called the incubation period of COVID. So an incubation period basically means how long does it take between when the virus enters your body and when you actually start feeling sick. Every pathogen has its own incubation period. Some of them have a very wide range. Some of them are pretty consistent. So in things like, say, norovirus and rotavirus here at the top of the graph, these are like your basic stomach bugs that I'm sure go through all of your districts at least once a year. Those have a really short incubation period. Basically, a kid gets the virus on Monday and he probably has to stay home by Tuesday or Wednesday at the latest. We see those things kind of go through the kids fairly quickly and they get over them pretty quickly. The further down this list that we go, the longer that incubation period gets. And so you see COVID-19 here in the orange, where the incubation period is somewhere between 2 and 12 to 14 days. This is actually where that 14-day self-quarantine guideline actually comes from. So in an attempt to keep people home throughout their incubation period, if you are exposed to someone who has COVID-19, that's why they suggest that you stay home for a full 14 days afterwards, because then we can guarantee that you are out of the incubation period. And if you don't feel any symptoms in all 14 of those days, then you are probably fine and not spreading the virus to other people. Importantly, on the right side of my slide here, I point out that over a third of all COVID-19 cases have been estimated to have been caused by asymptomatic people. So people who did not pay attention to this 14-day period and went out and just lived their lives, maybe without a mask, or went out into a crowd and spread COVID-19 without knowing that they even had it. So in the best interest of the people around you, it is really important to kind of take that guideline pretty seriously. It is grounded in science. I also want to talk a little bit about what's called the basic reproductive number of COVID-19. So this is something that we calculate for really every virus or major pathogen that we encounter. Anything that you've ever gotten a vaccine for, there's a basic reproduction number for. It's essentially a measure of how scary it is to get that disease, basically. So it's a measure of the infectiousness, meaning if you get that disease and then you just go about your daily life, don't take any preventative measures, how many people are you likely to infect by yourself? And it's also a measure of the fatality rate of that virus. So the further over to the right that we go on this graph, the more infectious that disease is. So you can see way over to the right is chickenpox. If any of you had kids, or maybe yourself had chickenpox, you know how quickly that can go through a group of kids. And then the further up that we get is the more fatal a particular disease is. So up here we see bird flu and Ebola, which I'm assuming you remember whenever those went through within the last, say, 10 years or so. Down here, probably further to the bottom left than maybe you expected, is the estimated range for COVID-19. So on the infectiousness, somewhere between 2 and 4 is the average number of people we would anticipate that you would be able to infect. And fatality rates somewhere between, say, 1 and 3%. We won't have a definite number for this probably for a couple of years. You're going to need a lot of data in order to fully estimate that, but that's actually a tighter range than I would have anticipated we have at this point in a pandemic. And if you look right in the middle of the box is the dot for the Spanish flu. And I don't think anybody gets through a conversation about COVID-19 without talking about the 1918 Spanish flu. So again, there is actual scientific research showing that these two pandemics are actually pretty similar to each other. So not only just anecdotally is it similar, how quickly it spread across the world, but we also see that they are have a similar level of infectiousness as well. And then I just kind of want to point out to you some of the activities that we should still be attempting to stay away from in order to keep ourselves, our families, our communities safe. I know probably a lot of you, including me, are really, really tired of the quarantine and tired of having to be home all the time, but it is still definitely not safe enough to do things like going to, say, an indoor bar, going to a nightclub, standing out in a big crowd at something like a concert, anything where you would be in a crowd of people that you don't know, where people aren't wearing masks, or where people are potentially yelling or singing, doing something where they are raising their voice. We'll talk in a few slides about the fact that that's actually going to cause potentially more virus to be emitted from a person, and so that makes it even more dangerous. Plenty of things, though, on the low risk side of the graph. So stuff like picking up takeout food, eating at an outdoor restaurant, going camping, going golfing, things where it's really easy for you to just stay near the people that you arrived with and stay away from all of the people that you don't know. In general, doing things outside is safer than doing things inside. It's easier to be out kind of in the fresh air, have, you know, if someone does emit virus, have the wind kind of literally blow it away from you. Now, as we are getting, towards the winter, your options on this list are probably going to decrease. Nobody probably goes golfing in the middle of December, but just to sort of keep in mind that it's going to be a while before we can do a lot of the things on the right side of this graph. All right, so let's talk a little bit about how respiratory infection actually spreads. And this is true for any respiratory infection. There's 3 primary mechanisms by which it can spread. There's direct transmission, droplet transmission, and airborne transmission. So we're going to talk about what each of those means and then some effective ways to mitigate against them. So we'll start with the direct or contact transmission. That means that somebody actually coughs or sneezes or something onto a surface, and then another person comes along, touches that surface, and then touches their face so that the virus can actually enter their body. So say a kid maybe sneezes on their desk, leaves class, the next kid comes in, sits down at that desk and touches it, scratches their face. Something like that would be direct transmission. Good and bad things about direct transmission would be that virus, first of all, can only live outside of the human body for a finite amount of time. Something like bacteria or mold or fungus can live outside of a body for a very, very long time. A virus is only semi-alive, and so it actually requires a human being, and it requires your cells in order for it to stay alive, in order for it to replicate. And so if it's sitting on some external surface like a desk, a doorknob, something like that, there's only so much time that it can sit there before it's going to eventually deactivate and die. That amount of time is going to vary based on some environmental factors. So is it really hot? Is it really humid? Is it sitting in direct sunlight? Stuff like that. And also the type of surface that it's sitting on. So I made a little chart here of some maybe common surfaces that you might and your students might interact with through the day. So you can see that surfaces that are very smooth and not super porous, like glass and wood, the virus can live for a long time on those surfaces. So a kid can potentially sneeze on a desk on Monday, and another kid can come by on Thursday or Friday and still come in contact with live virus. Things like cardboard, fabric, paper, things that are a lot more porous are not great for the virus. That's basically going to absorb a lot of the liquid that it's currently sitting in, and that will make it die faster. So this is good news for your teachers whenever they're worried about dealing with things like helping kids with their jackets and their backpacks and their shoes and grading their homework and things like that. For me, in my classes, I don't collect a lot of hard copies of things anymore just because I'm mostly teaching online. But if students do bring me hard copies of homework, I basically collect it on Wednesday and I'll pick it up on Thursday. And I know that that's enough time that if they were sick, I feel comfortable still being able to touch that paperwork. And I give the same general advice to my students. Some of them worry about whenever they come home, like, do they have to immediately throw their jacket in the laundry and disinfect their backpack and things like that. And I generally tell them, bring it home on Friday. You're not going to work on your homework until Sunday night anyway. I know you, so we can just, it'll be fine by Sunday. But that being said, definitely important to keep up all of the, I'm sure, extreme sanitizing measures that you are keeping on desks and doorknobs and things like that. All right, droplet transmission is the way by which we believe most of the COVID infection has spread. So droplet transmission means that somebody coughs or sneezes or talks, laughs, anything that is going to cause some level of mucus or saliva to leave their face, either through their nose or their mouth. Those droplets sit in the air basically, and then someone nearby breathes them in. These droplets can be big enough to see. I'm sure we've all seen, somebody talking and like watch them spit while they talk, which is gross, but those are droplets. Or they can be small enough to be microscopic and you can't actually tell that they are being emitted from the person you're talking to. Importantly, the vast majority of droplets that come from someone's face can only travel between 3 and 6 feet in the air before gravity will actually take them and pull them to the ground. So this is where that 6-foot social distancing rule comes from. It's actually not an arbitrary number, as I think a lot of people were sort of made to believe. This, again, is grounded in science, that the vast majority, like over 90% of droplets that come from the average person are going to hit the ground by the time they get to the 6-foot mark. The other droplets, though, that don't hit the ground in that time are the ones that we have to worry about. So this is where potential airborne transmission can come in. So if somebody emits some of those droplets from their face and they're in the air, sometimes the liquid around that droplet will evaporate before it hits the ground. And then instead of gravity hitting it, it will start to float, almost like little dust particles in the air. Except that these are so small that you will never be able to see them and you don't know that they're there. There is some debate about how frequently this happens specifically with COVID, but in general, just as you're talking, you produce a lot of these kinds of droplets per second. And as I've said before, if you are doing something where you're trying to enunciate, like right now I'm talking very loudly in the middle of my living room, and if I am pushing up on my diaphragm and I'm trying to enunciate, or if I'm yelling, or if I'm singing, I'm going to push even more of those out of my mouth, and that becomes even more dangerous. And because they are so small, it's very easy to inhale them. Some of them are going to have live virus in them. Some of them are too small to maintain the live virus, but again, you can't know because you can't see it. On the right side here, this top bubble represents the width of the average human hair, and the droplet size would be way down here. It's like 50 or 100 times smaller than a human hair. Airborne transmission has been in the news a little bit in the last couple of weeks. There's been some debate about how much airborne transmission is possible with something like COVID-19. You may have seen the CDC released a report saying that it was possible, and then a couple days later put out another report that said that they weren't sure. The NIH has independently verified that that is possible, and they found in their lab test that COVID could stay alive in its aerosolized format for about 4 hours. Some other independent academic labs found it to live even longer, like 12 or 16 hours. So this is an area where more research still needs to be done, but is something to kind of keep in mind as a possibility as you are thinking about mitigation measures in your own schools. So of course, the ability of the virus to live in that aerosolized format in a lab is very different than its ability to live in that form in your schools or in our homes. Labs are very, very tightly controlled. They have to be. In the real world, as we're dealing with differences in humidity, in temperature, in air pollution, direct sunlight, all of these things can affect the ability of the virus to stay alive. And again, in those droplet nuclei format, there's very little liquid around that virus, and it needs that liquid to survive. So in general, we don't believe that it can stay in that format for very long. But again, indoors, it is a little more dangerous if the area that you're in is not well ventilated. There are a couple of contained cases that we believe would have been caused by some level of airborne transmission through ventilation systems. These are some of the ones that made the news back in, I don't know, April or May of this year. So one totally asymptomatic person in South Korea was sitting in a very small enclosed call center. She had no idea that she had the virus. I don't think she ever ended up getting symptoms, but she infected all 94 other people that she worked with. There was a guy in Washington State who came to choir practice, didn't know that he was sick, sang for a couple hours without a mask on, and infected everybody else in the choir. So anecdotally, we do believe that there has been airborne transmission of the virus, but again, it's so early in the pandemic, it'll be a while till we have full data on that. Okay, and so for my last couple of slides, I just want to talk a little bit about how effective some of these mitigation measures have been. And if you remember nothing else that I tell you today, universal mask wearing within your schools, within your communities is the easiest, cheapest, and most effective way to reduce transmission of the virus. This is not something that people are just kind of saying to try to make you feel better. It actually does work. It only works though if you require masks of everybody. If you're only having people wear masks that you know were exposed or people who have shown symptoms, it's not going to be enough. We talked before about how many people have been infected by asymptomatic carriers of the virus. So it's incredibly important that everybody wears masks and that everybody wears them the right way, meaning over your nose, mouth, and chin. So just wearing them over your mouth, insufficient and not going to help nearly as much as if you cover your entire face. And if you would like proof, there was a doctor out of the Sacred Heart Medical Center in Providence who wanted to show just how effective mask wearing can be. So in this picture on the left, he had a person stand either 2, 4, or 6 feet away from these Petri dishes and had him cough for 15 straight seconds and repeated the procedure with a mask and without a mask, and then let the Petri dishes sit for a day. And look at how much stuff is growing on the top of that Petri dish when someone was only 2 feet away without a mask in one day versus someone 2 feet away with a mask. There's nothing on there. Now you can also see the effect of the social distancing policy without the mask, because as he gets farther away, 4 feet and 6 feet, there's a lot less bacteria on there. With a mask, there's never any. Is every mask absolutely perfect like this? No, some things can get through a porous mask like that, but very, very, very little as compared to having nothing on at all. On the right-hand side over here, he repeated this experiment, but instead of having someone just cough, had them try doing things like sneezing, singing, and talking, again, without a mask and with. With the mask, you see very, very little on any of these Petri dishes. Without the mask, look at how much comes just out of one sneeze. So again, very important that you make sure to cover your nose in addition to your mouth. I see a lot of my students keep pulling their mask down during the day because it gets uncomfortable. And I remind them that if I can stand in front of them for 2 straight hours and teach calculus in a mask, they can sit quietly with their mask on and be okay. All right, and then my last slide here, some other things that you can do besides just wearing a mask to protect, again, yourself, your family, your staff. Very, very important this year in particular would be to get a flu shot. Flu season every year officially begins on October 1st. There aren't clear guidelines yet on exactly how bad they anticipate the flu season being, but every year, even in a very mild flu season, tens of thousands of people end up in the hospital with the flu. Even more people end up in doctor's offices trying to get antiviral medication. And this year in particular, doctors at their doctor's offices and hospitals don't have the time and the capacity to deal with this. We need to make sure that we are keeping the hospitals from becoming overrun the same way that happened over the summer. And so the easiest way to do that would be to just get your flu shot. And then that way, if you start feeling flu-like symptoms, you can be fairly certain that it's not the flu, and you'll know what to do. Equally as important is to stay home yourself and have your staff stay home if, again, if they have been exposed or if they are feeling any kind of symptoms, and to make sure that they are being respectful of the 14-day incubation period. And then lastly would be to make sure that you are, as I'm sure you're already doing, sanitizing every surface in that school. We saw how long the virus can potentially live on a wooden desk. You want to make sure that you are preventing that as much as possible. Keeping dispensers of hand sanitizer around the school would be a good idea. I can tell you that at my school, I walked past 5 of them between my office and my calculus classroom, and when I taught yesterday, all 5 of them were empty. So making sure that you have someone checking to see that they are full is a generally good idea. And also having your faculty, having your staff encourage the students to use them so they're not just walking by them and ignoring them, which defeats the purpose. All right, and so with that, I will turn the reins over to my father, who's going to talk a little bit about what he's been doing at Kite Savannah.
Okay, so my topic is the COVID disruption and the new normal in facilities management. And I believe everybody here listening will agree with me that the new normal is abnormal for all we are accustomed to. This has definitely been a different world for all of us, and we got a lot of adjusting to do. Okay, get my slide working there. Okay. So what has changed in the new normal? Well, here are some things, what we are doing now that we weren't doing before. Body temperature scanning, I mean, whether you are using thermal cameras or wrist scanners or thermometers, we're checking temperatures as students enter the bus or the school. We're checking staff. Certainly nothing we've done before. We're practicing social distancing. We're requiring face masks. We're purchasing PPE and supplies far in advance from what we've ever done before. And we're buying PPE that we've never purchased before. I'm not going to get into all the details of the PPE, as I think we've talked about that a lot on our shared communication through the School Facilities Association. We're calculating staffing for virtual learning, and we're also calculating staffing for hybrid days. And my district was open for 8 days before we closed. So we were doing a combination of hybrid days, and we were also doing students coming in full-time in our elementary school. And when we had a positive case of COVID, we had closed. So we've now gone to virtual learning. So staffing, you have more staff on a day when you have students in the buildings than now with virtual learning. So I'm constantly changing staffing around based on the conditions that our learning environment is under. Before, I mean, you scheduled your staff and that was it, right? Now we're changing it all the time. Emphasis on emphasizing air changeovers and filtration levels. I don't know if any of us ever expected staff to come in and question us on what MERV is and HEPA filtration, but terms we've never expected staff to be questioning about was common conversation before school started this year. Zoom meetings, I could tell you last year I didn't even know what a Zoom meeting was, and now I have Zoom meetings daily, sometimes multiple Zoom meetings a day. We're getting bombarded with sales pitches and questionable product promises. I get emails every day with, we have this to offer, we have that to offer. I'm just cautioning you, be careful of the snake oil salesman. Things we as directors of facilities can't do. Read facial expressions. Everybody has on a face mask now. It is tough to see if somebody understands what you may be talking about. You can't tell if they're upset, if they're happy. it's created a little bit of a difference for us just reading somebody's face. Shaking hands, whether it's my day automation salesman, Eric Hilbert, coming in, or Dan Canan and Kevin Sullivan, my Carlow reps, or my superintendent, staff members, or seeing Brian Bentley out on the golf course somewhere, not being able to shake their hands, it's really weird. And I can tell you, I'm a fan of shaking everybody's hands. I think it's a good gesture of friendship, and I miss not being able to do that. That's one thing in the new normal that I really, really don't like. Socializing, our conference, chapter meetings, golf outings, etc., have all been put off. I will tell you that it is so great to be able to have this conference, and I have to extend thanks and recognition out to ADG and to Melissa and Robin and Kathy for putting this all together, and what a fantastic job they've done. My SFMI board, and to all of the School Facilities Association executive board. They worked really hard on putting this together, and what a fantastic job. And to be able to do this right now is just, it's awesome. Focus on what was once normal daily activities. I know a few weeks back on one of our calls, Daryl from Liverpool Schools was saying that at one point he was looking at his staff and didn't really know what they were doing in a daily, because we've been so focused on getting our schools ready to open and purchasing PPE and so on. It's really disrupted our normal day as a school facilities director. Expect to have a sufficient budget by spring. I don't know about the rest of you, but I've spent almost all of my money on PPE. My equipment budget went to day automation for thermal cameras and scanners. So basically, I don't know how I will have enough money if it was a normal year to get through this year. We've spent a lot, and I'm sure you larger districts have spent far, far more than I have. Have back orders be acceptable. You know, it was a time where you could tell somebody, yeah, whenever you get it in, it's fine. Now, if it's anything related to, you know, PPE, those type of things, we can't wait. And I know a number of districts who ordered PPE and decided to wait for them. And then when school opened, they didn't have a sufficient amount to supply to staff. So we can't wait for back orders anymore. And one thing we certainly can't do is sit back and wait to see what happens next. We have to be a little aggressive. The twindemic, COVID and the flu, that's the new term that's being floated out there. If you haven't heard it yet, get ready for it, because you're going to hear it a lot now, because we're going to be both seeing both the flu and a possible uprise of the COVID virus. The COVID-19 is going to be with us in the next school year in 21-22. We're not going to eradicate the virus. Vaccines will take time to produce and distribute. Vaccines will only affect 50 to 70% of the population, which means that 30 to 50% of the population will still be susceptible to COVID-19. These are numbers that we've seen the NIH and Dr. Fauci throw out there, and which brings us to how will your district, meaning you as a director of facilities, protect those who are unprotected. So if you have 100 teachers in your building, potentially, and everybody gets vaccinated in your building, potentially 30 to 50 teachers will be still susceptible to the virus if in fact the vaccine was not effective. And we don't really know that until they're exposed to it, right? And it also the same way with students. And we may, you know, a number of the students may be asymptomatic, not show their symptoms, but this is huge. This is something that you're going to have to start thinking about for the next school year, and you're going to have to start thinking about this now. What to expect and plan for in 21-22? Well, we will most likely operate the next school year much like this with PPE requirements. I would expect social distancing to relax. Will be much like the environment in Tokyo now and pre-COVID. And the reason I say that is people are going to get the feeling that if they have a vaccine, they're immune. Whether they know it or not, people are tired of wearing a mask because this is not part of our society. If you're in Japan, in Tokyo, in particular, where Ericka was last year, it's common practice to see people wearing a mask. If you're sick in Japan, you put a mask on and go to work. You don't stay home. They have a totally different view. And one interesting statistic from this is that the United States has 2.5 times the population of Japan, but yet we have 10 times the number of cases of COVID in comparison to Japan. And they attribute that all to that society is used to wearing masks and they wear them regularly. So it seems like we're going to have to go in that direction until this COVID virus is gone. Staff members over 60 will still be concerned as vaccines work better on the younger you are. And, you know, we have a number of staff that are over 60. We're going to have to be more concerned about them, protecting them. Younger teachers, staff, and students who have been vaccinated will tend to relax on PPE and disinfecting practices, while other staff members with any health concerns will be required continual disinfecting. You need to know how you're going to deal with this as a district. So again, when the vaccine is out, how are you as a district, are you going to require masks? You're going to get pushback from those who have been vaccinated. I don't need that mask, I've been vaccinated. The parents are going to be squawking. They don't want their kid to wear a mask during whatever practice and so on. It's a battle ahead, and it's something that as a district, as this comes about, we should start thinking about and planning for now. These are conversations you need to have with your safety committee, your superintendent, and so on. After the vaccine is out, I think treating touch points will go away, but hand sanitizer will remain in classrooms. I just think some things will get relaxed a little bit. You know, disinfectant only works as long as the surface is wet. So if you spray down a desk, it's effective while it's wet. As soon as that dries and it's killed all the bacteria, it's no longer, the next person comes in and sneezes on a dry desk, they've infected it all over again. Similar to door handles, right? We wipe them down, they're wet. After they dry off, the next person goes in. I mean, we're doing ours every hour through the building, all over. I just think as the cases go down and stuff, that may be one of the things that goes away. But if you touch the handle, you go inside the classroom, you wash your hands off, I think that's the way that it will go. Will you be wearing masks? Will you have mask wearing sections in events? Only those wearing a mask can sit in a specific section. This goes back to the old smoking and non-smoking sections, our days, you know, when you went into a restaurant. So if you are at a football game, people who are elderly, who are still concerned about contracting the virus, again, I'm talking after a vaccine is out there, are you going to have a separate section for mask wearing and those without a mask to help protect those that are still susceptible to the virus? Every school will continue to have some type of temperature scanner present at their entrance. I don't see that going away. They're still going to not let anybody in your schools with a temperature even after the vaccine. I think we're just going to be much more aware of this than we have in the past, obviously. Liability is a concern for districts. You will continue to take reasonable measures that protect the students and staff susceptible to COVID. So this is the one that really is a concern. God forbid we have a fatality in a school that's related to COVID, and if they trace that back to incorrect practices, you know, poor disinfecting practices, poor social distancing practices, not having students wear masks where required. You can't, the districts are not going to want to be put into a financial liability situation. So again, what we do now sets the tone for the future, how we're going to do this to keep us out of that liability concern. We'll treat students with health concerns differently. Special classrooms, special restrooms, they can use participation in activities with those not needing a mask. Again, students that have been vaccinated are not going to want to wear a mask. Others that have health issues are going to want to. How are we going to treat those? Most bus drivers are over 60. They will be willing to drive a bus full of kids not wearing masks. Will they want to do that? Remember, the masks are most effective in keeping you from spreading the virus, not contracting the virus. The droplets are biggest when they come out of your mouth, and Ericka was talking about that. You know, when they're airborne, it's a little bit different. They're smaller, they can penetrate the mask. Wearing a mask is good either way, but it's really critical. You know, if you're that driver and everybody's behind you and that bus takes their mask off on their way home, you're not going to feel very safe, correct? Okay. What we can expect for next year and beyond: budget cuts. Aid reduction will impact every district. I mean, we've all heard this about the 20% reduction in aid. We will still be dealing with the COVID virus next year. That's why we need to plan for it now. Trying to navigate through who is sick and who has COVID-19 is going to be a nightmare with the flu season this year and in coming years. Anytime somebody has a fever, sick, you know, red flags are going to go up everywhere. Which one do they have? They're going to have to get tested. Do we do the contact tracing? You know, which brings me to software to assist with contact tracing. I think that's going to be the new thing for next year. I know that I've been working with my vendor, Day Automation, on some of that right now, trying to get something in place for that. Hopefully a treatment will eradicate COVID soon after exposure. I know that Ericka is the senior research scientist at University of Pittsburgh. University of Pittsburgh had been working on a nasal spray that can basically kill the virus within a short period of time for exposure, that they were working on for first responders, that people may be, that were exposed, and if they use this nasal spray, it would basically eradicate the virus within them quickly. That still has to go through tests and FDA approval and so on, but that would certainly be something that would help. It'd certainly be something great for sports too, right? That all the kids after a game basically take the nasal spray and make sure that they're good. A document from the SED and Department of Health that gives requirements, not suggested practices. Eliminate should and replace with must. How good would it have been this year for all of us if we had gotten a document that said students must wear a mask, not should, or you must social distance. We need that type of direction going forward, and not you should do this, you should that. No, it should be must. It's important. I'm fortunate in my district where my superintendent, Mike Hayden, made the decision early on that every student was going to wear a mask, every staff member is going to wear a mask, and we are going to do social distancing. Not one or the other, we decided to do both. And you could plan to expect the unexpected. We didn't expect this virus, so who knows what's next. Helping your department's budget. Finding ways, oops, I jumped ahead one, I'm sorry. Let's go back one. Try that again. Okay. Helping your department's budget. We need to find ways to gain funds for this year and next year. Review service contracts. If you could do it in-house, bring the work back in, look at your service contracts, see if you're getting the bang for your buck with those dollars. Cleaning chemical bids. I know we buy a lot of our stuff off the BOCES bids. Those are pretty competitive. If you're buying them off other contracts, you may want to take a look at that. I know chemical purchases for cleaning are a big part of my budget. I was able to change vendors this year, and I reduced my chemical supply budget by switching to Rochester Midland by nearly 40%. Reduce energy costs, utilize NYSERDA. Certainly going around your building, making sure we're turning lights off, maybe lowering your temperatures a little bit. I would definitely utilize NYSERDA and the free programs that they offer to help you reduce costs. Auction surplus items and equipment. Work with your business manager. I have a great working relationship with Susan Gray, our business administrator at Clyde Savannah, and this is somewhere where her and I would be able to work together, make sure that that money could come back into my department to help me with other purchases. Lease new equipment. If you can't buy something, maybe look at leasing it, lower costs, something to help you get equipment you need. Add staffing to reduce outside contract costs, reduce staffing to use contractors for work. Sometimes you could do subtraction by addition by adding a staff member with specific skills that you can bring in. Maybe he's an HVAC experienced person. You can eliminate your HVAC PM program you may have with an outside vendor. As far as reducing staffing, you don't want to see anybody lose a job, but you may have the one guy that's a one-trick pony, has one skill, and maybe you look at farming that up, because if we do see budget cuts, I'm sure all of us across the state here are going to have to make some hard decisions. Ask for better pricing. Never a bad thing to go to your vendor and say, can you do a little bit better? Doesn't hurt to ask. Look at vendors outside your region for pricing. From this, my first thing is, in the words of my friend Keith Langlots, you are one superintendent away from being an idiot. And when you switch districts and you go to a new job, you may find out different systems in your new district. So for me, coming from Waterloo into Clyde, there were certainly some different systems. I know that when I go through our conference in Saratoga, I try to speak to every vendor there. I get a business card from them. And this year when I made a switch, it was nice to open my drawer up and pull out a business card and call that vendor directly and say, hey, I'm now here. I see you are the vendor for that. The other thing is, you pick up the phone and you pick up and you call Matt Della Penna and out Batavia and ask, hey, who do you use out there? Or Anthony Merlini downstate and ask Anthony, hey, who do you use for a vendor for your floor pads or whatever it is? Or Ralph down in Susquehanna Valley, and who do you use as a supplier? So you can look outside your region if you're having trouble or pricing and do that, but always look at the vendors we see at the conference or at your local trade shows you have through your chapter. Cost savings purchases. I know this may sound stupid to most of you to buy a key machine, a blade grinder, or a thermal temperature gun, but I will tell you that I've been in 2 districts, and in those 2 districts, neither of them had these 3 things, as simple as they are. It costs us $50 to make a key because it's a 45-minute drive to the locksmith to get the keys made. We stand there for half an hour, we drive back, we're using gas in a truck and so on. So, I mean, it was a no-brainer to buy a key machine. Thermal temperature gun, if you don't have one, spend the $400 or less what it is. I mean, that's gonna save you energy, goes right back to finding valves that may be stuck open and so on, really help you get through the heating season with diagnostic work, and you can find some savings there too. I'd also suggest using both these services when you can, whether it be HVAC, electrical, all those things are great. Other helpful tips, just things to work on. If your district is on remote learning, use that time to develop or improve your preventative maintenance plans and your computerized maintenance management systems. Load it up, put all your assets and stuff in there, put them to good use. Document all you're doing. This goes back to Keith's phrase about the new superintendent. And when you go in, if you're negotiating your contract or whatever, you're going in this year for your review on your contract or whatever it may be, don't go in and just say, I worked really hard this year. That doesn't cut it. I put in a lot of hours. Well, response is, well, maybe you've been promoted beyond your capabilities, or you don't know how to manage your time, as a former boss of mine used to joke about. Write down everything you're doing, whether it is, the PPE. Look, I bought all the PPE, had it here in time, so we were able to get the school open. I was able to get all this done with the staff that I had, limited staff. Note everything, cost-saving measures you did when you renegotiated contracts. I went to one of my vendors who we had a contract with for PMs, and basically they took off $2,000 off my price when I threatened to go to another vendor. That's things you could document. In God I trust, all others bring me data. So when you go into your boss at the end of the year, give that list. Or if you go to a new job, you go into your interview, provide them with that document that says, here's all I accomplished at my previous district. So it sounds simple. It's hard at the end of the year to remember everything you did. So take out a piece of paper and write down your accomplishments and always keep up with that. It's a good time to build relationships with instructional staff. Take time to recognize your staff, simple hellos, how's it going? Training sessions for staff, lunch and learn, cross-training. Again, if you are on the virtual learning, now's a good time to do those kinds of things with your maintenance staff. Get to know your buildings better, prepare for your BCS. If you haven't done it yet, now's the time to start crawling around, looking around, making your list of everything you need, especially if you're like me into a new district, you don't know it that well, now's the time to learn it. Buy products with sustainable shelf life. This is huge with disinfectant. I had somebody today on a chapter call tell me that their vendor told them, oh, we only put a date on it for the hospitals, but it'll last a lot longer for you. Well, that's great unless it's a liability issue in a lawsuit, because if somebody comes in and, God forbid you had a fatality and they came in and looked at your expired disinfectant, if nobody tells you it's good, you had an expired product, they put that date on there for a reason, you're going to be liable. So don't be caught with expired products. My Rochester Midland disinfectant has a shelf life of 3 years, so I'm fortunate that way that I can have it. Rotate your stock so you are using the oldest items first. My chemical vendor, Upstate Facilities, will ship my stuff in stages after I order it, so that as I get low on product, I bring it in there, so I'm not always pulling stuff off the front of the shelf, and I do it that way. Don't accept old stock from vendors. If somebody's sending you an old box of stuff, you're probably not going to want that. So make sure you're always getting fresh stock. And that's my tips, and that's my speech. Thank you.